Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from New York City. I'm Susan Tehrani, and these are the top headlines this hour. Iran sentences to death 5 people over the killing of a besieged parliamentary force, paramilitary force member during nationwide protests sparked by Mahsa Amini's death. Russia and Ukraine exchange 60 prisoners of war on each side in the latest of a series of such swaps. Ukraine's foreign minister condemns India's ramping up of Russian oil purchases following Moscow's invasion as morally inappropriate. Chinese President Xi Jinping will arrive in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday for a 3-day visit, his first to the world's biggest crude oil exporter since 2016. A roadside bomb kills at least 7 petroleum company employees commuting to work on a packed bus in northern Afghanistan's biggest city of Mazar-e-Sharif. But first, we start here in the United States, where voters in Georgia are set to decide the future of the U.S. Senate. U.S. President Joe Biden's future legislative agenda and possibly the future of a former U.S. President Donald Trump. The winner of the midterm election runoff in Georgia will make history, as whoever wins will be the first African American to be elected from the state to a full Senate term. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and his Republican challenger Herschel Walker will clash in a hotly contested runoff after neither of the candidates earned more than 50% in the November 8th midterm election. Herschel Walker is backed by former President Donald Trump. A Walker win would give the Republicans a boost, while a Warnock victory could indicate that Democrats are making inroads in places where they have had difficulties gaining traction in the past.
Can you believe that? He made a lot of money too, didn't he?
But what, if anything, will this poll hold for former President Donald Trump, as many Republican Party members and donors are blaming his continued presence in this year's midterm for underperformance of Republicans? Will this affect his bid for 2024? Well, according to a new survey, Trump trails Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in a new Utah poll of possible GOP contenders for the 2024 presidential race. According to the poll, Ron DeSantis leads in a hypothetical Republican presidential primary at 24.2%. The former U.S. president came third with 14.6%, 2 points below Liz Cheney, who is the U.S. representative for Wyoming. The latest poll indicates Trump's sliding popularity. Another poll by the Marquetta, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, found that DeSantis was backed by the party's nomination by 60% and Trump by 40%, which is clearly a 20-point lead that the Florida governor has taken. But this doesn't mean the Democrats are not doing anything to win the race. The Democrats have called on their best hopes, the most charismatic leader in the Democratic Party, as they say, former President Barack Obama, campaigning in Atlanta last week. the stakes are as high as possible in the Georgia race. According to reports, some $400 million have already been spent in the campaign, and this makes the Georgia race the most expensive in all of the midterms.
You call us fired up and ready to vote. I want it fired up.
For more on this, we are joined by journalist Michael Tracy from New York. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So it seems so much is at stake for Georgia. Some are saying that this is a referendum not only for President Biden's legislative agenda, but once again, to quote Mitch McConnell, candidate quality when it comes to Herschel Walker and perhaps the future of the Republican Party with Donald Trump as its possible leader.
Well, I think it's worth being a bit leery of those sorts of all-encompassing narrative explanations that are ascribed to individual races. Of course, a Senate election in Georgia that's high profile and has national implications could have some bearing on a wider political narrative, but oftentimes that's sort of pundit pontificating. So for instance, the factions of the Republican Party who are either reticent or actively, aggressively opposed to another Trump candidacy are already dug into their positions more or less, irrespective of the outcome in Georgia. They seized upon the midterm election results last month, the minute they were in, and the minute that they could be construed as indicting Trump's poor judgment in selecting Republican primary candidates. So even if there were to be a Herschel Walker victory today, it's hard to imagine that those same Republicans who have already kind of committed themselves to that particular interpretation of Trump's performance, all of a sudden reevaluating and becoming supporters of Trump running for a second term or backing his candidacy. And I guess similarly for Democrats, it's funny because once these narrative sort of constructs settle in, it's very difficult to ever dislodge them. And the narrative construct that settled in immediately after the midterms last month for the Democrats is that they very impressively overperformed, right? And Biden was being given lots of credit for his steady leadership or his political savvy. A lot of this is just, frankly, mumbo jumbo, because you can take whatever you want from election outcomes. They're very disparate, and especially this cycle, they've been sort of heterogeneous in terms of the variability of election outcomes and gubernatorial races versus House races versus Senate races in multiple parts of the country. So I apologize if that's not the most scintillating answer, but oftentimes it's just pretty much necessary to dispel some of these easy, oversimplified narrative interpretations.
Yeah, it's remarkable how the bar was set so low for the Democrats in this midterm on the one hand. And on the other hand, I guess, how much they banked on Raphael Warnock. I mean, he really raised more than any other federal candidate in the 2022 cycle. And more African Americans, at least according to polls in Democratic strongholds, went and voted in early elections, dispelling that myth that there is voter suppression regarding Georgia law and all of that. So I guess my next question is, why did the Democrats bank so much on Georgia? Is it because they're hoping that Georgia, perhaps in 2024, will become, a swing state and will flip Democrat again, like in 2020?
Well, in 2020, Georgia had already become a hugely consequential state, right alongside Arizona and maybe Wisconsin as the pivotal states that really tipped the balance of the outcome in Biden's favor. And there was a ton of sort of frenzy around Georgia's vote administration laws, or its election laws essentially, and conspiracies or wild theories proffered about malfeasance in that regard. And either way, Georgia is sort of central now as a tipping point state in the overall sort of American national electorate. So it's not surprising that both parties would devote a large amount of resources to that particular race. But on top of that, Herschel Walker in particular became almost a comically outsized foil for much of the media, where he would be constantly lambasted, mocked. The media would be always on his trail, trying to, fish out old personal scandals. It's funny. I don't know that I've ever heard Herschel Walker give an extensive statement on his position with respect to, say, Ukraine war funding or all manner of other issues, including foreign policy issues. But if you tune into even just a snapshot of the coverage over the past, 2 or 3 months, you'll get a whole host of information about what his relationships were like with his old girlfriends, his son, and all kinds of other gossip and drama. But because Herschel Walker is sort of an unusual figure, especially for Republicans to have nominated in the South, he has the very noticeable Southern drawl. He speaks in sort of malapropisms. He has a very distinctive, a regional dialect that he infuses with sort of bizarre colloquialisms at times. That made him a sort of an easy target for national media to kind of swarm as almost a stand-in for Trump, because obviously Trump wasn't on the ballot in 2022, but they could kind of tie him in with Trump, and Trump did endorse him and facilitate his nomination as the Republican Senate candidate, so it's not entirely unfair. But still, Herschel Walker had sort of a celebrity status that lent itself to probably disproportionate animus being directed at him by his political opponents. So that, I think, partly explains it. And also, Georgia actually is just sort of demographically interesting. It pretty rapidly changed its demographics, or evolved in the past number of years. Not long ago would have been almost unthinkable, or at least difficult to imagine, that a Georgia Senate race could be comprised of a black male Democrat running against a black male Republican. This had been a solid Deep South state where that would have been not particularly a likely outcome, and as most people would have seen it. So I don't blame people for being interested, but there probably was a bit of an excess focus.
It is very interesting to watch. And I will say, regarding Herschel Walker, if he was a Democratic candidate, then I think the media would have covered him very differently indeed. Michael Tracy, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you back on WION, and we'll be watching Georgia very closely.
All right. Thank you.
Moving on, staying with the United States, the disgraced U.S. lawyer Michael Avenatti, who represented porn star Stormy Daniels in her lawsuit against Donald Trump, has been sentenced to another jail term, this time in California. Lawyer Michael Avenatti was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for stealing millions of dollars from clients and tax fraud. This sentence will be on top of a 5-year prison term previously imposed in 2 cases in New York. Pronouncing the sentence, Judge James V. Salina said that Avenatti had done great evil for which he must answer. The judge also ordered Avenatti to pay nearly $11 million in restitution to 4 clients and to the IRS. The 51-year-old lawyer will spend 168 months in federal prison for embezzling millions from clients, one of whom was a paraplegic with mental health issues. Federal prosecutors said Avenatti pilfered $12.35 million by skimming settlements he reached on his client's behalf.
So I'm going to make a brief statement.
U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada said that Avenatti was a corrupt lawyer who claimed he was fighting for the little guy. In fact, he only cared about his own selfish interests. Estrada went on to say that Avenatti stole millions, all to finance his extravagant lifestyle that included a private jet and race cars. Avenatti rose to international fame in 2018 as a lawyer who represented porn star Stormy Daniels in her case against then U.S. President Donald Trump. Daniels was embroiled in a legal battle with Trump over hush money she received for an alleged affair with him in 2006.
Exit safely and peacefully.
Defense ministers of Australia and the United States met in Washington, and according to a settlement by the Pentagon, a statement, by the Pentagon, both nations are determined to counter destabilizing military activities by China. UK Defense Minister Ben Wallace will also attend the first in-person meeting of AUKUS ministers in Washington. The Defense Technology Group of Australia, the United States, and the UK is formed to deliver nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia. Last week, a U.S. Department of Defense report on China said that Beijing is making a diplomatic push to criticize and subvert AUKUS. China is Australia's largest trading partner and the top market for exported iron ore. But Australia's concern has grown about Beijing's military ambitions in the Southern Pacific after it struck a security pact with the Solomon Islands this year. However, last month, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the G20. Many experts consider this a step towards normalizing ties, but doubt it as a shift in Canberra's defense policy. This AUKUS meeting comes at a critical time for the partners. This will also set a roadmap for an Australian nuclear-powered submarine fleet.
The way forward is, or every step of the way forward is not necessarily obvious.
It's ever been. And it remains vital to.
Back here in the United States, flu cases are the highest they've been in a decade, and COVID-19 is also increasing. This is according to federal health officials. Around 14 children have died so far this flu season. There have been at least 8.7 million illnesses, 78,000 hospitalizations, and 4,500 deaths from flu so far this season. These respiratory viruses are spreading as people gather indoors due to the colder weather. The ones most at risk are those 65 and older, children, and pregnant women. Therefore, they have been urged to get vaccinated, and doctors say get the flu shot now.
This is a very, very disturbing scenario. What I'm upset about is that people are just tired of getting vaccines. A lot of us, understandably, are over it. And we're tired of the precautions. We're tired of avoiding things. But when you get a vaccine for a preventable illness, you prevent you from spreading it to people around you. We still have an obligation to infants who have not yet had vaccines or have not developed the immune response, the immune capability to protect themselves.
This comes against the backdrop of the pandemic, which has still not been fully overcome, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. COVID-19 cases have risen after the Thanksgiving holiday, and COVID-related hospitalizations have also increased by 15% to 20% over the last week.
Part of it is because of the crazy experience we've been through over the last couple of years with COVID. With COVID, we have masked ourselves, we have avoided each other, we have isolated ourselves, and we are tired of tired of taking these precautions. When I go out, I see very few people that are masked, and at the same time, there is a lot of us are tired of getting vaccinations, and the flu vaccine rates are lower than they've been before. So we haven't had respiratory illnesses other than COVID.
Pepsi. The lagging flu vaccination in pregnant women has caused a serious concern. About 12% fewer pregnant women have been vaccinated so far compared to last season. And for children, it is 5% fewer. The rate at which the hospitalizations are rising is causing concern. The 7-day average was 4,201, reflecting a 17.6% increase in the last week. Further, there have also been potential drug shortages amid a wave of respiratory illnesses.
When I was a little healthier. When I was a little healthier.
For context, is that drug shortages are not uncommon and is something the administration is regularly monitoring. The FDA is always tracking shortages at the national level and works closely with manufacturers to understand their production and supply. And while FDA does not manufacture drugs and cannot require a pharmaceutical company to make a drug, make a more of a drug, or change the distribution of a drug, FDA is in touch with the various manufacturers and stand ready to provide support where possible.
As the economic pain grows and in a sign that corporate productions and reductions begin to extend beyond technology firms, Pepsi is laying off workers from its headquarters and the North American snack unit. Reports say that the New York-based company will dismiss hundreds of employees, according to a new internal memo. Pepsi reportedly described the layoffs as an intent to, quote, simplify the organization. The maker of Frito-Lay chips, Mountain Dew soft drinks, and Quaker Oats cereals have already passed higher prices onto the consumer as the prices of commodities such as sugar, corn, and potatoes have gone up. The high inflation has rattled the companies in a variety of industries and led them to ratchet on the costs. Big tech companies, including Amazon, Apple, and Meta Platforms, have announced dismissing thousands of workers.
Norms around, right? Take.
Oh yeah, because them doesn't send me off for me.
Uber's rival Lyft said last month it would reduce headcount by 13% and hive off its first-party vehicle business. That's all the time we have for this news desk from New York City. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Susan Tehrani. Continue to watch us on WION for more news. Bye-bye.
This is great, Arab.